the phone and said, "Oh, your people called." And I was like, "My parents? Who am I?" No, your people. You should definitely go and be with them. And I could see where she's right. Our department is new, and it is a place for the Jesus movement in action. And it is a place where we're trying to make the church more like you, my people. The deacons who carry the load of the work of the church in the world. And so first I thought perhaps we could say a little prayer. I know we just finished morning prayer, but this is my prayer of the Jesus movement. Almighty God, who is the ground of our being, we stand here with you today because you bid us walk. You are our guide in the way we walk as one people. As this church of yours, with all its turns and angles, God, you are our map maker. You bid us walk in liturgy with the all y'alls and the all yous. You bid us do. You know the way we stumble, the way we think, the way our spirituality can hem us in or set us free, the way we yearn for you, the way we are profane and absurd, racist and classist, sexist, and yet we still pray. God, bid us walk and praise when we're reluctant. Guide us when we're afraid. Be our companion. Whether we circumambulate, whether we're abstract in our fears, whether we feed the gloom or the glory, when our hearts are breaking, when we are alienated from community. God, when we're more concerned about donors and ASA, when we're furious about capital campaigns or bishops, when we're trying to check privilege, we pray. Whether we're refugees or first families, whether we're asleep or awake or woke, God, we pray that you lead us out of the disconnect into your liberation, into your courage. Make us walk. Amen. So there's been a movement happening, and I think it started in 2015 when, in one miraculous vote, we got a new presiding bishop, Michael Curry, and he started preaching this sermon about the Jesus movement. And it was empowering and exciting, and here we are several years later, and still people are going, what is the Jesus movement? Or I heard at the cathedral just a few months ago, do you know Bishop Curry has got a new thing? It's called Jesus movement. So still new to many of us. And yet, we also hear people are uncomfortable with the idea. They don't love the phrase, not universally, which is a surprise to me as it may be to you. Some people think, well, it sounds too evangelical. The word movement sounds like protesters only. Sounds too liberal. So there are people who chafe against the abstraction. What is this Jesus movement? I love Bishop Curry says, the Jesus movement is the ongoing community of people centered on Jesus who follow him into loving, liberating, and life-giving relationship with God, each other, and with the earth. Sounds pretty good, right? Who could argue with that, the Jesus movement? And yet, the Jesus movement speaks to places where the church has not gotten things right. So that's the irony of it. He's so positive and sweet, isn't he? But the point of having the Jesus movement, the point of staffing and realigning 815 to do this Jesus movement work is because there are some things that Episcopalians have not been really good at. There are some places in which we have fallen short. And so that was the impetus for not only my position, for Ken and Speller's position, and for all the folks who work with us. We're trying to enact what Jesus movement might be. And it's been a work in progress. I love when he called me. I was in Richmond, Virginia at my parish to offer me this job. And I said, well, how do you know we're going to do it right? He goes, that's the question you're going to answer. So I'm going to turn that on you. You're going to answer that for me and for Bishop Curry. How will we know when we're doing the Jesus movement right? Which is why I'm appealing to you, my people, the deacons, the people in the world and in the church, because knowing when we get it right is the work of large community discernment. It's the work of huge culture shift. It's the work of pointing out some painful things. First off, we have not been great at reconciliation. Our racial work was mandated in the 2015 General Convention. There's a lot of money that followed. It's one of the 3 pillars you heard about yesterday and will continue to hear about. Bishop Curry has promised us that this is his entire 9-year agenda. So we're not going to have something new 3 years from now or 6 years from now. The 3 pillars stand, and racial reconciliation is one of the big places where Episcopalians have fallen short. We've got work to do for the movement. The second place is in evangelism. Evangelism, the church is not dying. How do we spread movement? How do we grow disciples? How do we do the work? And the third pillar, creation care. So all of these fall under Jesus movement. They fall under Ken and Speller's hierarchy, and all but evangelism fall under my department. So we're the Department of Racial Reconciliation, Justice, and Creation Care. That includes all of the work of social justice, advocacy, and engagement. That is not OGR, so we're not going to take you to see your congressman on the Hill. Those are people who do that. But we're the work of helping people in the pews think about, live into, understand what's going on in the newspaper. How do we advocate as citizens and as Christians? What does it mean to be a part of the civitas, the commonwealth of God? And how do we articulate the needs, desires, and fears of people in our life and work? Racial reconciliation, the third part of our department goals, is taking on some really specific mandates out of General Convention. Becoming beloved community, doing the work of sacred storytelling, building bridges, healing divides. We're also creation care, which, when you think about it, the people who are most affected by environmental degradation, people who are most vulnerable, are people of color, women, children, people throughout our country and throughout our world that are connected in our desire for justice. We also have UTO. UTO is a part of our department because, and this was their decision, most of UTO grant money goes to domestic causes. I know they're known for sending money all over the world and supporting wonderful charities and ministries, but the majority of UTO funds go right in the Episcopal Church and domestically within the United States. And they see their work as funding and empowering the Jesus movement. And so if you've been applying for UTO grants or tracking their work over a while, you've seen that every year from now on, the UTO grant themes are Jesus movement themes. And that's no secret. It's about empowering the people of God to do the Jesus movement work. And so lest you think, again, that this is just the work of a few liberal people on high or Bishop Curry, all of these mandates come right from this body, General Convention, that says what we want, support, and believe as a church. Over and over again, there are many, many resolutions about the things we care about, but we use those to say, where is Jesus calling us? This sounds like the Jesus movement. And we love to help people understand that although Bishop Curry preaches the sermon, the idea of Jesus movement came from the people, came from the body, it came from the church. And so that's one thing I think we have to feel powerful and proud about as Episcopalians. We don't do things willy-nilly. We do them because we, the people, have discerned them over years, over decades. So that's where we are, the Jesus movement. But thinking about what it takes to make that work, to lean and live into what was a problem, what was a lack for us. 2 letters, some deacons, and then this first letter. April 16th, 1963, this letter starts, "My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling my present activities unwise and untimely. Seldom do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas. If I sought to answer all the criticisms that cross my desk, my secretaries would have a time forever and ever. I would have no time to do constructive work. But since I feel you are men of genuine faith and goodwill, I'm going to try to answer your criticisms set forth. And the letter goes on and on. It's from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And the first name of the first addressee on that letter was an Episcopal priest in a parish still active in Birmingham, Alabama. And so here we are 50 plus years later, and this past spring, the deacons of Alabama wrote another letter. We, the members of the community of deacons of the Diocese of Alabama, we are engaged in various ministries that answer our call to serve all people, particularly the poor, the weak, the sick, and the lonely in the name of Jesus Christ. Our ministries include the homeless, the elderly, the prisoners, children, immigrants, LGBTQ persons, and we work with environmental concerns and interfaith relationships. But from these ministries come our ongoing concern that this year, 2018, marks the 50th anniversary of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Poor People's Campaign and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference's work, seeking racial and economic justice. And we believe that this work is going to be continued. And in our promise that we made at baptism, in our ordinations as deacons, we commit ourselves to support the Poor People's Campaign, to support a national moral revival. We commit ourselves to active engagement and ministry. We commit ourselves again. The deacons did that on their own. And fortunately, one of the deacons is also the press secretary of the diocese. So she put it on the website. And there the bishop followed. And he really did follow these mostly women, mostly older women, who made a statement of faith. Because I think, and I'm pretty sure that you know, deacons lead in being able to stand in a place of justice, in a place of danger, in a place where perhaps your bishop might have to follow. But so goes the diocese, so goes the entire Episcopal Church. I can tell you that having gone to seminary with lots of now priests, we are good people. When we mean well, most of us are focused on justice, but we're also worried about ASA. It's justice and it's butts and pews and from a position of free from worrying about, well, capital campaigns, you can lean in and listen to justice. Listen to what Jesus is calling us to do. So I love those deacons in Alabama. They inspired me, but also they inspired, in some ways, the whole country. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So the Jesus movement and its three pillars harkens right back to what Dr. King was telling us, because he talked about three evils. The three evils were poverty, were lack of funds and racism, and also ecological devastation. And that's where we get that mirror. I think we're in sync. I don't say that Bishop Curry made it up. I don't even think the Episcopal Church made it up, our Jesus movement ideas, but we're in sync. And I think we're now answering that letter that didn't get answered way back in 1963. This is our time to live into the moment, to answer back either in letter form or in active form. What is our church calling us to do? How do we answer right now? So we reorganize and we realign. And a lot of what we do at 815 is about institutional work. It's funding, it's granting, but it's also reframing. We are trying to correct the way Episcopalians live into the moral narrative. Because we live in a world that tells us what Christians are. They're, talk radio people. They're judgmental. They're only worried about their concerns. We live in a world that says what the people around us are. Well, poor people are lazy, right? Women are not powerful. We live in a world that constructs these narratives, and we have a moral duty to work on changing that. So how do you inspire a whole church to do that? How do you inspire people from the parish level to the diocesan level, all the way up to 815, to expand our theological imagination, to change our American moral narrative, to live into our Christian values and the way that we see Jesus? Do we see Jesus? I think we do. So we're celebrating something new. And as Bishop Curry said at General Convention, we're doing it because we know God is good and our people are good. Our country is good. Not because we're great, not because we're trying to make America great again, but because we celebrate our past in the true sense of the fact that we are a people that live out values of care, concern, humanity. And if no one else could bring America back to its senses, well, we can try. So the Jesus movement in the Episcopal Church is a big, bold idea. Can we bring America back to its senses, to its values? Can we accept this huge challenge? It's a moral and spiritual revival that says we don't just pray well and have lovely funeral liturgies and lovely music, but we go out, we seek, we march, we proclaim that injustice is wrong. We proclaim that sin and bigotry are evil. This is real work. This is hard work. We want to make it possible for everyone in this country to be treated as an equal of God, under the eyes of God, and under the eyes of the law. So we're going dangerous places. We're going out into the courthouse. You saw Bishop Curry this past spring march to the White House to pray. And finding that other space that isn't just protest space, but a space to invite people in however they are, wherever they are. So there was a lovely kind of statement in the New York Times that royal wedding preacher Michael Curry is going to the White House. His staff insists it's not a protest. But it isn't a protest. It's marking a way of praying into public. So we insist it because it's true. But how do we, as people of faith, help people pray their way into the streets, into the public, into the place between sectors? Because that's something that no one else can do but us. We are lucky that way. So here is some of the ways we're doing that. First try, first run, last year, Becoming Beloved Community, which was so popular that foundations like the Kellogg Foundation were coming to our door saying, teach us what you're doing. Because people in all sorts of sectors of America are thinking, obviously, about racial injustices, about bigotry, about oppression, about privilege. So Becoming Beloved Community as a curriculum and as a series of teaching and sermoning tools was our first step, and it was pretty bold. Everyone didn't love it. It didn't make everyone comfortable. If you have not seen the Labyrinth and all its tool sets, I have copies for you here. But people find it encouraging because it can be used not just thinking about racial injustice, but economic injustice. I was talking to someone from Southern Maryland. He said, we're using it to talk about gun right owners and non-gun owners. How do you enter a beloved community with people who differ from you? So we're emphasizing the same set of skills again and again. You'll hear them again and again, and it's about telling the truth, proclaiming the dream, practicing the way, and repairing the breach. But now some people, if you have seen it, said that, well, it was a little complicated. It's a little, I don't know, perhaps the way of love and Becoming Beloved Community might be too branded. So we hope that these things can be flexible. And I mentioned to you last night that our goal at 815 is not to own this work and to stamp it and say, yes, Bishop Curry made it, but to equip all the people of the Church of God to do this work. And so we're thinking, well, what's an open source way of doing this? So that's how we get to Bishop Curry's way of love. And if you've heard him say this, if it's not about love, it's not about God. Going back to our core values, back to the basics, sinking in and helping people emphasize that this is who we are. This is what we want to do. And this is open because, well, it comes from our source. I love that I heard this story again and again about this year's General Convention worship service at the Hutto Detention Center in Texas. And I want to pick on someone here. Where's she? Where's Maureen? This came about because some deacons, some lay people, some delegates said, we have to stop what's happening with the regular general schedule. We must do something now. So there were some phone calls made, some tweets were sent. There were some bishops who were dragged into a conversation that said, what can we do to upend a multi-dollar schedule that's been published for months to address a pressing concern? Because we can't be people of justice without acknowledging that there are women separated from their children in the name of our citizenship, and that's wrong. And within a few short weeks and a few very crowded and confusing Zoom conversations, a new worship service was put on the agenda. And Bishop Curry was invited and said, of course I'll be there. And like we said last night, Trinity Wall Street funded 25 plus buses, and hundreds of people got on those buses from downtown Austin and rode out to the middle of brushland to a tiny town where we acknowledge that there is an Episcopal church, there's a factory, and there's this prison. The one place that you can get a good job. And so we hold all of that up in prayer and yet make our social witness. And I love this picture because, as the bishops mentioned last night, folks didn't follow the rules. We were worried about the police, but not only did we sing and we pray, but people walked as close as they could get to the edges. And there were windows in that building. And inside, one of the lawyers working with the woman said they could hear you, and they were waving papers back, saying, pray for us. Thank you for praying with us. This is witness. But it also inspires courage for us as a church. I can tell you that before we did this, people were really afraid. What is this, a protest? Will it destroy the agenda? Will it crowd out the Bishop's March in the morning? Will it make us too political? But we took this step and it was liberating, life-giving, loving. And I can tell you the sermons that were preached afterwards, the teachings that keep rippling from it. This is our, and so I think every little step makes us bolder, inspires us, gives us courage as people of God to do this kind of work. There's a place for Episcopalians to do this intermediate space witness. Beyond just EPPN, which we have and we love, the Episcopal Public Policy Network, where you can write letters to your congressman or senator and talk about how you vote. There's a space for our prayerful witness. It's a space where we pray into that leadership vacuum in our country. So when I see this picture again and again, praying into that space where the newspaper meets the Bible, where the prayers and the concerns of the world meet people who are going to be in the pews. I think this is our vision. This is our work. This is our goal for the Jesus movement going forward. So I hope that you are thinking and coming up with wonderful deacon-like ideas to help this church be an example in these spaces, to lead us with courage, because we all need a little boost sometimes. We're all a little bit afraid, but we all can learn from each other, from that disturbance of folks insisting with a Zoom call, we've got to do something. And if you weren't at General Convention, this woman, Princess, should be on your YouTube watch list. Princess is a young adult member of the Gwich'in tribe. They are Native Alaskans, and they are Episcopalians. And the Diocese of Alaska, there are two dominant ethnic groups, the Gwich'in and the Inupiat. The Inupiat are Presbyterians. So you know right there, fights happening. No. But the Gwich'in, with their very faithful young women cohorts who are leading their parish and their community, live on one side of a river in a really remote area of Alaska where you have to fly in. And if you want groceries, your Amazon delivery has to come by plane. The Inupiat live on the other side of the river, close to the water, close to the sea. The Inupiat eat fish. The Presbyterians who eat fish. The Gwich'in, Episcopalians who like their caribou. They like their porcupine caribou. That is the food. And they hunt because, you can't drive to Walmart to get the food. Now, the Inupiat have found a way to make money with pipeline contracts. Gas pipelines are a big business. The closest group to the pipeline gets the money. But what happens is the pipeline cuts off the Gwich'in from the caribou. So now you have oil companies sparking conflict between two native peoples around food that they must have to eat. So these Gwich'in women, these young women, went to their bishop, the Bishop of Alaska, and said, can you help us? Because we have a conflict, and we think it's a legal conflict. Or maybe it's a racial conflict. Well, there's a pipeline involved. Maybe it's an environmental conflict. The bishop came back to Bishop Curry and said, what is this conflict, and how can the church speak into this work? And this is where we identified, this is the Jesus movement. Because it is kind of an ethnic conflict. It is also a justice moment. It's also an environmental issue. And so this is where the idea for the first environmental justice and environmental racism sites sprang up. Because we had an idea. Well, perhaps the Environmental Justice Committee could think of a thing that we could do with these folks. What did they want? They wanted conflict resolution training. And they wanted Bible studies about conflict because they wanted to go to their neighbors, the good Presbyterians who read their Bibles, and talk about how they could join together, how they could get back to their Jesus roots together and figure out a way to mitigate this hunger, this physical hunger. Because they were facing lots of issues. The pipeline, global warming makes it so that the porcupine caribou don't run as fast. They can't get around the trees that are springing up. But also, how do you approach the state legislature? And also, how do you keep the conflict from being so personal that you fight with your neighbor? We thought, oh yeah, this is the Jesus movement. This is a way in which the bishop, who is not a pipeline expert, but does know something about Jesus doing reconciling work, can lean into that space, could prayerfully enter what could just be, an environmental pipeline issue, and make a way. And lifting up these people and these young men especially to tell their own story, to do their own justice work, turn them into some internationally famous activists. And so at the drop of a hat, these almost girls will get on a plane and fly to Washington, D.C. and stand there at the steps of the Capitol, meet with congressmen and senators, and make the case again and again that what is holy and sacred to us is our land, our ability of people to eat, and our ability to hold on to peace and justice. And so she came to General Convention and gave a little TED Talk, but it doesn't belie the whole story of the richness of this work, of how they are teaching us, the church, to do Jesus movement, to think broader and bigger, to ask, okay, how can we really help? This work is scary and big, but it's helping us figure out the words. How do we say that what we're doing is that important? Because we live in a country where 1 million Americans don't have clean water. Not just Flint, Michigan, but all over 1 million American citizens didn't have water to drink. And what the Jesus movement is teaching me is that the power is not just in writing the letter to the Congress, but saying, when children don't have water, that's a sin. Now, I know we're Episcopalians, we don't like the S word too much, but it is a sin to point out that denying people basic rights denies what Jesus told us is the basic fundamental loveship of God. Children of God deserve these basic things, and those are things we all agree on. The basic values, the humanity that we want to encourage. So we point to that again and again. We think about it as the Jesus movement. And there were the things that arose with the Poor People's Campaign. So I want to back up here. So my deacons from Alabama, in their letter, which I'm so happy to send around so you can see that sometime, mentioned all of the justice issues that arose in their neighborhood. That down the road, not even 10 miles from the diocesan headquarters, where the bishop's office is, was another little town where children were getting ringworm in 2015, 2016, 2017. Outbreaks of ringworm right down the road in Birmingham, Alabama. And it turns out it's because they lived on the wrong side of the tracks, in the majority Black space, in a place that had been neglected, but also a place where the Alabama state legislature had seen fit to promote cheap dumping. Truckloads of waste come from New York and they kind of leave them there. Had seen fit to save money by not really providing adequate pipelines. So clean water was scarce, and houses were using sump pumps and all kinds of corroding infrastructure. And then climate change. If you live on the Gulf Coast and you notice there's a lot of storms. What used to be a once in every 100-year storm becomes a once in every 10-year storm, becomes, well, every year major flooding happens, and flooding in a place of toxic dumping and poor pipes means sewage rises up from the ground day after day, and little children who run and play, well, they get ringworm. They get a 19th century disease. And the people who noticed that and started hollering about it, well, they were some Episcopal deacons. Some Episcopal deacons who worked with their local activists and said, this is a huge problem. And it's not that we see environmental work as just the role of people who drive Priuses and eat sprouts. This is environmental work that affects all of our humanity. And they shouted and disturbed loud enough that it got the attention of the United Nations. And last year, this special rapporteur, Philip Alston, came from Australia. So that's a person designed to investigate human rights problems. They usually go to places far-flung, but it shocked us that this person was coming to America. And went right to Alabama, started in D.C. We're told he was invited by the Obama administration, that the Trump administration would never have invited him. But he had the invitation, he came in and went to Alabama and took pictures and videoed people and interviewed people. And you will see one of these deacons in some of those reports, reporting on this neighborhood, which is like a suburb of Birmingham, where children were denied basic rights. And that technical document, that legal document, became the place where some people said, oh, that's wrong, and that's a sin. That's a sin. Little children without clean water. That same document, that same report, sparked an outrage. And a few months later was adopted as one of the planks for the Poor People's Campaign. So when Reverend Barber, who started Moral Mondays in North Carolina, makes his speeches and talks about why environmental work is important to justice, he talks again and again about visiting that county, Lowndes County, Alabama, which is just a stone's throw from the state capitol, and seeing these women who were telling him that something has got to be done because it's a sin. It's wrong and our children are suffering. Deacons have great power to agitate and aggravate. And when Bishop Barber started paying attention, well, we all paid attention. We all were able to point to this, but also was empowering for the people of Alabama. Those deacons also became the leaders of the Poor People's Campaign for the state. They were one of the most organized. They came to DC by the busload. As many Episcopalians followed. We marched, we prayed, we sang. But to be able to say that here are Episcopalians who helped tell the story. They told the story of the most vulnerable amongst us. They inspired us. They were our leaders. They helped us walk in this Jesus movement way. So we talked about how we're finding our way into what is this Jesus movement, because it's been a work in progress. And when you figure it out, you're going to call me or text me and tell me what it is, right? Tell me what it means for us to really be doing it. And so the next thing that Bishop Curry announced, and I'm so glad so few people were at General Convention because it's going to come as a surprise, was how do we get to a place where the Jesus movement is not so confusing? What does it mean to be doing the Jesus movement? Hence the way of love, and I'll start these back here, as an invitation for all Episcopalians to think prayerfully, to do Jesus movement. And so because he's a better speaker than I am, I'm going to let Bishop Curry talk a little bit about, here we go. No? How do I do this?
If you click on the arrow.
If I click,
Yeah, it should play.
I do have a cursor. I have a cursor. You know what? We're gonna do it this way. I always have a backup.
Turn, learn, pray, worship, bless, go, rest. Turn. Figure out how can I every day turn my life like a flower turning toward the sun, to turn my life in the direction of God's love, in the direction of Jesus. Learn every day. What can I learn from the Word of God through reading of Scripture, reading of spiritual materials that help to train up the spirit, if you will, but to wrestle and to live with Scripture, paying particular attention to those passages and teachings where we actually hear the voice of Jesus. Pray, to spend time every day.
There we go.
Some real time. It doesn't have to be long, but some real time in real prayer. And there are practices of prayer and different ways of prayer that can help us in that journey.
Can we restart it? Because they're the captions now.
Learn, pray, worship, bless, go, rest. Turn. Figure out how can I every day turn my life like a flower turning toward the sun, to turn my life in the direction of God's love, in the direction of Jesus. Learn every day. What can I from the Word of God through reading of Scripture, reading of spiritual materials that help to train up the spirit, if you will, but to wrestle and to live with Scripture, paying particular attention to those passages and teachings where we actually hear the voice of Jesus. Pray, to spend time every day, some real time. It doesn't have to be long, but some real time in real prayer. And there are practices of prayer and different ways of prayer that can help us in that journey. Worship, to gather in Christian community at least once a week, preferably for the Holy Eucharist if it is possible, to gather for worship as in community where we are with other Christians and other believers and other followers of Jesus, where we can worship our God, open our lives to God, and be blessed by God and by each other. Jesus said, wherever two or three gather together in my name, there I am in the midst of them. Turn, learn, pray, worship, but then bless. Somebody once said, we have been blessed so that we might be a blessing. To each day, make a decision. I'm going to live my life as a blessing. And at every turn in that day, every moment of decision, how can I be a blessing in this day, in this way, in this moment? And then to go into the world, and touch somebody's life, to go into the world and to love the way Jesus loves, to give the way Jesus gives, to forgive the way Jesus forgives, to do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with God like Jesus. And then after turning, learning, praying, worshiping, blessing, and going to rest. It is not an accident that the seventh day of creation in the book of Genesis is when God saw all that God had made and God rested. The soul must rest. The spirit must rest. If God rested, who are we not to? Turn, learn, pray, worship, bless, go, rest. These are words that point to practices that can train up the spirit to follow in the way of Jesus and to look something like Jesus. The old hymn says it best. Breathe on me, breath of God. Fill me with life anew, that I may love what thou dost love and do what thou wouldst do. God love you. God bless you. And may God hold us all in those almighty hands of love.
So what do you think? Wow. And this literally came about this past spring. We have these in all languages, and you can take them with you. Creole and Spanish, and here's a small handout as well. Bishop Curry said, I locked some bishops and some church members and committee members in a hotel room for 24 hours and said, what's wrong with the Jesus movement? How can we say this better? And this is kind of what they came up with. And it's not anything new. As anybody in an order, any monks or nuns here could point out, they keep telling them, you stole our stuff. So we're not saying that Bishop Curry invented rules of life, but to help people enter into the Jesus movement in a way that is empowering, that makes sense. But this is where the open source bit of this happens. So if you look like on the back end of all these things, there are hashtags. And even on the Episcopal Church website, there's a very clear place that says, tell us what you think. All of this stuff is online and it's in the raw format so that you can change it and use it and manipulate it, because we're thinking that perhaps you will tell us what makes the way of love work for you. What makes this powerful? Can you see this as a tool for not only yourselves, for people leading the way in justice, but to help drag other people with you?
We just tomorrow is rest at my church. We've done the 7 steps during preaching.
Oh, awesome.
We've integrated them into our preaching schedule.
Nice. So there's a church that is already using them, has been through several of the steps and is going through the rest step. I love this.
Judy and I each discovered that we both preached on this.
Last week, I did it last week.
I did it last time when I
Oh my gosh.
to the convention.
Already sermons. Wonderful. I want to see, we would love to see those. If you email or hashtag them, we're definitely collecting them, because the thought was sort of, Ken Spo says, like a Pinterest page, but really big. I think people learn best from each other. They're following each other's examples. And so to see how people of faith are using this is inspiring. It's a template. It's a tool that works.
So who do we send them to? You?
You can send it to me. You can, if you go on the webpage, there's a link that'll go straight to me and Candace Spellers. If you are a hashtag person, you could hashtag and we'll find it.
I sort of know how hashtags work, but
That's okay.
I'm old. I'm old.
You can do it for the Instagram. I don't know.
I do a lot, but not
No, you're not dead.
No.
You're not dead. So therefore you can learn.
You got an idea back here.
We're doing Christian formation adult ed thing on the Jesus movement and being disciples. And we're using, we had one of these and.
Yeah.
I'm using it every time.
And you use the D word, being disciples. Another new territory for us.
It's going to be the theme of our convention.
Nice. I love this. I'm so excited about this. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Candace Spellers is coming to our convention, so I assume we're going to hear it.
Yes, you will hear it.
I was going to say personally, I'm so glad that Rest is there, because I think as deacons, we are both doing jobs in the world and being deacons in the world. And let me speak for myself.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get discouraged because I feel worn out and I forget to rest. And he said so beautifully there that if God rested, who are we not?
Right.
And I think unless we rest and pray, we're not going to do all the rest. So it was so
Amen.
lovely to hear the way you said that.
Amen.
Okay. That video is available.
That video is available. It's on the website. It's on YouTube. Yeah, it's a wonderful introduction. I feel like, are you pondering? We use it in staff meeting, and we found the same issue. We're people who don't rest. We feel we're doing God's work, and there's so much to be done. But it occurred to us in our staff meeting or planning retreat, well, the only things that don't deserve rest are not people, and we are children of God, and we too deserve a kind of time of renewal.
I think the current political climate is designed to make us discouraged.
It's a little crazy, yeah.
And so I think that one of the antidotes is rest.
Thank you. I love this. The antidote is rest and prayer. You wouldn't be faulted for having a favorite one of these words. I do, and for a long time I was definitely into the go, because we're gonna go out there, we're gonna do justice. There we go. I'm gonna skip ahead. But there's been one of these words that has sort of sparked renewal within me. And so when we take our little break and come back at the end, leaning into one particular word, going on, which I might have overlooked, but thinking about the things that make doing justice possible in the Jesus movement. The blessed one about sharing faith and giving unselfishly, being a key energizer, an engine for those of us who, after our rest, and between us marching forth, leading the people of God to do this work. And so we are supposed to take a little break, right, to check out of our rooms at 10:30. And we'll dig a little bit more into bless as a practice, a practicum for doing this work. But between now and then, I would love to hear any other thoughts you had, questions about the Jesus movement. Where are we? Where are you? Does this inspire? Does it make sense? Is there a gap between the church that we think we are and how we're able to lead people into doing this justice work?
Our diocesan council wrestled with a couple of the phases. I think we did learn and go.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. One of the things that I noted was that we talked a lot in the Episcopal Church about having meaningful and deep conversations. I'm thinking of Jeremy's presentation last night. But in fact, the way our life is structured, particularly with our focus on Sunday morning, there's rarely time for that engagement. I think one of the good things about this is it might create some opportunities, an excuse even, to sit down and talk about praying, sit down and talk about and to actually have the conversations that we say we want, but don't ever really get to. I think, it's part of the busyness that we're all experiencing right now, and I think it's also just because a lot of our churches, 80% of the people are only there on Sunday. They're not coming for another occasion. They're very busy, and so by the time you've got choir, worship, coffee hour, you're ready to go home, and the conversation never happens. So I think one of my hopes is that maybe we can officially make it permissible for a triennium to sit down and talk about one of these things on a Sunday morning.
I love it. Intentional and bold. Yeah. We don't really have time to talk about that. And just I remember being in a parish and trying to get people to do basic justice work. We're going to take over the laundromat and do laundry love. It was only in the processing afterwards, the reflecting after the action, that people were able to process, to go really deep, to understand why it was more than just a feel-good moment, and to inspire them to do and understand, oh, these are the issues facing this community. Laundry's expensive. They need to support. I'm an ally and a neighbor, but that talking moment was so critical after the action and before the next thing, in the midst of that rest. I love that.
One of the things that we're doing at my parish on Cape Cod is a series that was developed by our interfaith group focused on King's letter from Birmingham. So I'm really interested to get a copy of the deacon's response. That would be huge. But what it's led us into, it's a 5-week series. And we wound up with 25 or so people showing up for an 11:30 session for about an hour and a half with no food. And it was a wonderful example of learn, building on resources that, for lots of us, building on resources that were available from outside. And that was, It's been a really excellent link between the Episcopal branch of the Jesus movement and our brothers and sisters of all the faiths on Cape Cod.
I love that. I don't think we would have thought that this would resonate outside of our Episcopal branch for folks who aren't really accustomed to our language and way of doing. So that's really encouraging. Thank you.
I have a practical question. Is this in other languages? Translated
Yes. Oh yeah. It's in already in, like I said, lots of Spanish. Here you go. If you want these, it's in French Creole. We have some Taiwanese, and if there's something missing that you don't know that you want to have, you can request it. So our goal is to really think of ourselves as we are not the national church. We're a denomination. We're in 70 countries. So yeah, lots of languages.
I just want to do a sidebar. At General Convention, we heard over and over the official languages of the Episcopal Church are English, Spanish, French, and Haitian Creole. The largest diocese in the Episcopal Church is Haiti. So we need to get used to the idea that it's not all Anglo-centric.
Thank you.
And there are many, many, many Spanish-speaking people and French-speaking people. And I think that was one of the gifts of this General Convention. Was like, okay, Episcopalians, walk the walk. Get those interpreters in there and get the stuff.
Thank you. Good point. Yeah. Always reminding ourselves the largest diocese is Haiti and Haitian Creole. We have a lot of it. But we're also attuning all of our missions and all of our work to be really intentional about that, which means we do things differently. You make time for translation. You make time for transliteration. So community organizing training is now in Spanish. We do everything in French Creole, Haitian Creole, and it's a part of being inclusive. But it's a learning for us. It's a skill. Yeah.
I have a really practical question. So I started writing it down before you showed the graphic, and I started with learn because it was up top. So I thought initially, you learn, you pray, you worship, bless, go, you rest, and then you turn. But it actually starts with turn. So why doesn't it turn at the top and rest at the last one to make it? Because again, it just I think it's very intentional where it starts. So you turn, and that's another pause I like too.
Yeah.
But I just was interested in that because I thought it's
That's a good question. I mean, when Bishop Kerr's video starts with turn, but yeah,
You know, Michael got asked that question.
yeah. Oh,
You can enter the wheel anywhere,
yeah.
and turning is every day. You get up in the morning and you turn. So he starts with turn because that's, I think, his entry point. But probably some of us could enter and go.
Yeah. It's we're not people who like to tell people how to do stuff. So right. We're waiting for the hierarchy to tell us.
The thing that calls out to me is worship and what you said in the video, because I think we all have a bunch of beloved people around us who are spiritual but not religious. And I find God on the beach, and I find it. And I think, and I'm in the third year of my formation, so this year we're an independent project. I don't have a parish home. And already I'm feeling very disconnected by not having that weekly worship in community, a home community. And it's just so important. That's why I say to my friends, we're like, oh, I get it on the beach or on the golf course. I'm like, yeah, but it's in community. It's that sense of coming together, and even somebody you've had a disagreement with, you turn and say, peace of the Lord. And you emphasize the Eucharist if you can get it. But yeah, I just think that's such an important part, because certainly when you don't have the weekly worship in community.
Yeah.
I mean, praying is great. I do my morning prayer, but boy, being around others, either the same mind or different minds, is really important.
And I'm sure, I feel this dilemma all the time. Like, I have the weird job, so you have to get it where you can get it. Even sometimes it's on an airplane, or finding worship anywhere you can find it, anywhere of those faithful companions. But when you kind of shift over to like making your religious hobby your whole life, it doesn't shake out so neatly, does it? You have to sort of create that space for you, but you need it to renew and to keep going. Yeah, I don't know if that maybe it's just me, but yeah.
I love that. Make your business hobby your whole life.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, there.
So this is really great, I think, because I've heard Jesus movement in 3 areas of focus, but I've never seen this before. So am I correct that this is like the implementation of
Yes.
Jesus movement?
Oh, I love that. Yes, I'm gonna start saying that. It's the implementation. Just
And so I heard a little parish, where this kind of stuff that nobody talks about, anything about general convention. So the other thing I'm just wondering is they in our diocese, I'm from New Hampshire, I'm from the church up there, and they have this thing where 5 little parishes were asked to be in this renewal works. I think.
oh yeah.
Is that part of this?
Renewal Works is run by Episcopal Church Foundation, but we're all in sync. Forward movement. Thank you. Forward movement. Yeah. And I think we are in conversation and communication, so it's not something that we have to run out of our office. But yeah.
It's like some other kind of program.
Yeah. We don't claim to own all of the Episcopal formation ideas in the world.
I mean, I think just as thinking about it, it's something else you said early on. Is just this idea that, or what Bishop Curry talks about. It's sort of making it based on prayer and stuff.
Yeah.
Versus, sometimes I feel like the church becomes, it could be like any nonprofit advocacy. And,
Right.
It seems like what you're saying, and I was thinking why we're doing this renewal works thing is to kind of get connection back to
Yeah.
prayer and scripture.
Yeah, if you do have a justice-leaning bone in your body, or the J chip, as I heard someone say, you then sometimes have to argue, like, how is what I'm doing not just the work of a social worker? United Way does this good work, so it's plugging back into that spiritual source, that line between we're not just doing protest and advocacy for the sake of it, but because we're living our spiritual values. But that hopefully this wheel and entering into it will be the thing that reminds us to, spin and go back to our values.
We were going to say it'd be fun to put it on a spinning.
And give prizes. We should make one. If you make one, I want to buy one. We can hear in there. Yeah.
So my excitement was the fact that we always get inspired by the bishop, and this was the practical answer to that. And I was, fired up, and I did preach the sermon, and now I'm sitting here 2 months later saying, okay, but that in itself isn't enough. It's like, and now what's next? Like, how do we engage? So we're equipping, but engaging, you have to educate, equip, and engage, right? Or educate, whatever. You have to do all three. But you have to engage the people, because hearing this is like another inspiration. Like, it's like, oh, okay, so I got the what and I got the how, and I'm the who, right? But even myself, I need something to hold me accountable. So, like when you do a diet, and diets are great, but where's the accountability? And then we fall off and whatever. There's so many things that we get inspired to do, but it's that accountability that somehow or other, I think, is the next step, but I'm not sure how to do that for people. As deacons, this is kind of part of who we are and part of our spiritual disciplines.
Right.
The people in the pews don't really have that, and the people that we call to go out into the world don't really have that. So that's what I'm struggling with is, okay, so it was great, and I can send you the video, and that was good, and yay. But I'm thinking that was 2 months ago. Nobody's sitting around talking about that. We didn't get these. I handed out paper copies that I made, but even that, it's something about somebody I think mentioned doing one at a time, and that's important to get people engaged that way. But I'm just saying that it's that accountability piece that to keep people motivated, to keep people engaged is a really hard thing.
I appreciate that question, because even for us, your community of worship or your deacons group, your clergy group provide that accountability. But how do we do that for lay people, especially people who don't come to worship regularly, or people in a particular praxis?
Even like Bishop Lane said, like people are so busy, and then to get them on Sunday morning, then they're burned out, because they did 3 things in one day. Oh my, But and to say, well, gee, Tuesday nights we're going to get together and we're going to do practices for Jesus-centered life. I don't think that's it. That's not it. It's some combination of what Garmity was talking about, where we bring it down to my life, my being accountable then. Anyway, it's a combination.
I feel like there's answers coming up.
For me, when I look at the logo, I see the center and the pinpoint as being myself or others, and everything goes out, and none of it is done in isolation. And that's where what happens and what's been happening out on Cape Cod comes in, and it's not your responsibility to do all of these things at once. And at different points in time, people will come in and be affected by the interactions that you're having through conversation and with one another, and some of what Darby said last night.
I like that. The calling in the ministry is not just ours, it's broader than that.
Yeah. And not having a beginning and an end on that wheel.
And their communities.
Because prayer, whether it was prayer you had with someone, or whether it's someone else's prayer that brings them into that action, or worship, where worship happens in many forms in many places.
I like that.
So it's in it's 2 or more.
Yeah.
So yeah, I see the way of love and practices. So really, it's a way of life as well. And right now, we're really talking about how we interact. And with what I'm hearing is our adult parishioners, those in our congregations. So if we're looking at making this a Jesus-centered way of life, what are we doing, or where are we at with the youth, with the children? Is there
That's a good
something
question.
for a Sunday school that can be brought in? And I'm
Yeah, that's a great question.
I don't know how, but is there or
Bible
is there
story to
thought?
go with each one.
A Bible story to go with one. And that's a great question. And I actually will ask for you because I know the formation team takes all of this and works on ways to communicate that for youth and young adults at all levels, but I'm not sure where they are. So it's
What about the younger ones?
Yeah.
The ones that if we start this as a Jesus-centered
Centered
way of
life.
life right from the get-go, when they first get into Sunday school.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
They're raisin bread.
Yeah.
Where are they going to be once they get there?
They're raisin bran, they're cereal. That's a really good question. Got a question right there.
Begin to look at where people are already engaged, like we do in Vermont Interfaith Action, we do one-to-one, and then work from there out, so that you're getting people further engaged or more deeply engaged, let's say, in what they're already have a passion for.
So kind of back to the community will provide the spiritual accountability, the drive to return back to someplace in the circle or in the way. I have it in here.
So these practices go into a little bit of what we were talking about last night. That God has a mission in the world, and each of us has a call to participate in that mission. So the practices help us to discover the call that we are each getting, to develop the courage to go out and embrace it, and to live into the joy of doing it.
Yes.
Those calls will be different for different people, lay and so on. Part of the reason we're deacons is because we heard that call, discovered what it was, and are now living into the joy of that as icons of how you discover that call. At the center of all this is God's mission and God's call to mission, and the practices help us to discover this.
Yeah. The piece that's you don't see is, and we talk about this all the time, a bit of inspiration was this 1963 prayer card. So for folks who were about to go marching with Dr. King, you had a commitment. And the first three were, I commit to meditate on the life of Jesus every day. I commit to pray, and I commit to read about the scriptures. And then it was, I pursue justice. Something about returning to prayer as being the thing that keeps us going and inspires us.
I think we should say that this is not the only piece.
Right.
And for example, there are other pieces with quotes from the Book of Common Prayer.
Yes.
And it's odd. I mean, the scriptures are very short. The quotations from the Book of Common Prayer, they could easily expand it into a whole curriculum.
Oh.
Yeah, you could do a Bible study on the curriculum. You could look what the Episcopal Church teaches from the prayer book.
Yeah.
So I think this is just kind of a framework for work that could be done in congregations very expansively.
Yeah.
I think it would be easy to turn it into a 7-week Lenten study without any stretch.
Oh, gosh.
Without any stretching.
Right.
Just, get somebody who's got a Bible and a prayer book and sit down for an hour and come up with a lesson.
It's a loose scaffolding to be filled. So way in the back.
And when I introduced the format, which I really like, to some of the parishioners, it reminded me of a chart that we used in formation a while ago, where we could say on any given trajectory, where did we think we were? Are we at the beginning? Are we at the middle? Are we at the end? And you could sort of draw your own map to illustrate to yourself what are the things you want to work on. Because it's pretty hard to do something new in all the quadrants all the time. But you could say, well, I really haven't been at the learning stage much, and I might want to.
That's my growing edge or something. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Or, I have my prayer life is less than I would like it to be. I think that's what I want to work on. So one way to use in informing one's own rule is, to do that kind of spin around and see where you think you are and what you want to deepen for yourself
Right.
or for somebody else. I don't think it has to be equally attended to necessarily.
Yeah, totally. I like that strategy. Yeah. Oh, either one. There. Don't take it.
So I was just thinking, different things people have said, like, so the notion of accountability as individuals or a community, like parish or something, using this tool, and I'm wondering maybe if it's on the website or something, because it's like doing an assessment almost for oneself. These 7 dimensions, like where am I strong? Where am I not so strong?
Yeah, where's my uneven and yeah.
And I'm just thinking though there's a certain, it's just kind of great framework. I think we have to think about the implementation in terms of time, because I think when people look at things like this, it's like, okay, back to other examples, right? I've already done coffee hour and went to church and did 5 other things and I've got a job. So, like how we help people look at this and not see it as like, oh my God, I can't sign up for that because there's so much there, and how to play with time.
It's not to be overwhelming. Yeah.
Just piggyback on Sean. In my practice, when I work with depressed clients, they're often overwhelmed because they can't find a way in and it feels like there's too much to do. So we focus on one thing. And my experience is if somebody does one thing, it opens the way for the next thing. But you have to limit it to the one thing. And then I turned to myself and said, well, Stan, why don't you do that for yourself? So I've tried to focus on one thing. And I think one of my disciplines now that goes where you started was each morning to say, what is one thing I can do today to walk the way of Jesus? But then at the end of the day, to go back to the New Zealand prayer book and not beat myself up if I haven't done it.
Yes.
Done has been done.
Not been done. Not been done.
Let it be. But they both, it's kind of zen. Both things are absolutely essential to me. To map the walk in the morning with just one thing, then to forgive myself completely for what didn't get done during the day. And both things together somehow create a workable way of
That's so gracious and life-giving. I love that. Yeah. You need the both and. Excellent. Yeah.
We're going to do something like a Bible study. But we're going to do The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. And I thought, what a great way to incorporate this into it. A Case for Christ is about a journalist from Chicago, from the Tribune.
Yeah.
And he's an atheist, and his wife is an atheist. Something happens and his wife starts to believe in Jesus. He says, I'm going to take this on, and I'm going to prove that Jesus isn't real or is real. And he comes out to prove that Jesus is real. And he even becomes a minister later in his life. So it's going to provoke a lot of discussion. And what a great way to incorporate that idea, those ideas, and however many people come.
Yeah.
We're going to do it like for 6 weeks, and we'll see what. I'm just excited. Thank you.
Yeah, look at a way to assess and how whole is this work and how whole is his ministry or his case? Interesting. Very interesting. Good. Any other questions or comments before we take a little break? And because we get to check out of your hotel rooms, come on back and we're going to talk about a way in. And I love this idea, this one focus. And so we're thinking about a praxis or practice that we can all try to engage, bridging the link between spirituality and doing justice work ourselves and our others. So we have until 10:45. Oh,
11, I think.
Oh, okay.
Would you just remind people to bring these with them?
Yes. So here's your reminder. This wonderful handout from last night. Please bring that back with you when you find it in your hotel room as you pack up and check out. And you have until 11. So that's what we've got. Oh, it's 10:45. It's 10:45.
10:40.
Okay, so pack quickly, but bring your sheets back. So thank you very much. Thank you. I'm good. I did bad things to the computer, didn't I? Somebody came and took a whole,
I'll
the bulk.
I'll go find them.
Yes, and there's lots.
This one's finished.
There's probably, yeah.
Right.
This
Thank you.
woman, she came and asked
it's
in
all online,
Spanish,
great.
and so that's actually be about 100. So
Okay,
maybe she'll
I'll find-
share.
Are you coming? I know Stephanie's coming to Vermont for our diocesan convention. Are you coming with her?
No.
Oh, shucks. Because they're loving what you're doing. Thank you so
Well,
much.
that would confuse people because we're too short.
It would just be twice as good.
That's awesome. Thank you. I love your questions. It's awesome. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. So congratulations on checking out of your room so quickly to bring your lights back to us. One announcement. Wait, Elaine? Hillary has helped us get back to our eco-consciousness, and she's got a bag over there to recycle your single-use plastics. So owning our part in this collective need to heal the world, if you drop your plastic bottles over in that green bag over there, that's very helpful. Thank you, Hillary. Questions about the handouts and things? If you go to the Episcopal Church's webpage, you can click on the bottom and order more of everything, especially the small bits. Now, here's the tricky thing. There are about 10,000 copies of the big glossy foldover. If you get in line early, you can get your copy. Otherwise, what we're going to start telling people is, this is a PDF that you can send to your local Kinko's and have them printed out. And so that's the way the church is sort of balancing that out. And you can do that right now. All of those things are in the digital friendly printer format on Episcopal Church Explore the Way of Love, something.org. Yeah.
In the meantime, I understand there are some Spanish ones floating around. Are there two that I could take with me? Two of the Spanish ones with the big glossy foldout?
He's asking with all generosity. If there's a stack, if you've got the Spanish and you can just spare two little ones.
Even one.
Oh, even one. That's awesome. I don't remember who got them, but Spanish, Haitian Creole, all available. And there are some other little bits and things as well on that website. You can take it, you can flip it, you can put your logo on it, change the colors, do all kind of stuff. If you do something neat, let us know. Email us, because we just love seeing how people are taking that and using that. So, so we're thinking about kind of what one of the surprises for me. Oh, we went all the way back to the beginning. Okay. When I first saw this way of love diagram, I thought, oh yes, if I had to focus on one thing, I'm a go person. It's all about the go, right? Like, yeah, I'm going out, doing justice, go. But I was talking with Bishop Curry, actually, at our annual all-person New York staff meeting about the benefit of all those pieces. And it struck me that the piece I least understood was there's something there for me for encouraging folks to do justice in the church, and it was the bless. And I began to rethink it, and I rethought about it this way. I rethought about what is the thing you do when you're blessing in this context. I mean, not in the I absolve you blessing, but blessing as sharing. Jesus broke, Jesus gave, as a thing that knits you and I together, and that Martin Buber, the I, thou, that exists. That there's no I until there's a thou, and blessing is that thing that links. And I began to think about Well, one of the things Bishop Kerr talks about is just sharing your story. It's a blessing. And that's a part of the Becoming Beloved Community curriculum. It's a part of our evangelism curriculum. Somebody asked about that. That tool is not new. We all do it. But story sharing is something very holy. And I thought about it this way. So right before I started working at 815, I was in Richmond, Virginia, at a very large endowed parish, St. Paul's. If you've never been to Richmond, it's the church where Jack Spong was a young rector. It's also a church that used to get thousands of tourists a year because it's floor to ceiling gilded with Confederate iconography in the windows and in the plaques, and even our shield had a little tiny like rebel flag in it. But it's a church full of like liberal people who are kind of the most edgy justice people in the city, who worship with, there's a stained glass window of Robert E. Lee as Moses with his rippling abs, and he's leading the Southerners to freedom. And across the way, there's Jeff Davis in chains as Paul before King Agrippa, So there is a disconnect. There's a disconnect that everyone in this parish lived with, because they were also the church that founded the first homeless shelter. They founded the first inner city school support program. They've been doing this for decades and decades, and thought our good works make up for all of this Tiffany windows that we can't get out and all of the Confederate flags. And it had been going along and hired me to come and talk about justice all the time. It was great fun. But they noticed after a while that some of their work had been stalling out because the church is in downtown. And although folks drive in from the west side or the east side to this old gilded place right next to the state capitol, the neighbors closest to the church would be the 4 largest public housing complexes in Virginia, so kind of all within a mile radius. And for 15 years, this church had adopted one elementary school, did a deep dive. They were part of the All Our Children group, like a founder of that. Every church member had a classroom, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade. They were all in for a decade and had been ups and downs, but it sort of stalled out. They just couldn't figure out, well, we're not changing the neighborhood. We're not changing the school. We're people who love justice, and we understand the concepts of neighbor, and you keep preaching at us about mapping our neighborhood and doing community development, but something's not working. So we sent a committee to our local interfaith action group. So Ed, you're gonna love this story, I think. And someone else mentioned your IAF or your DART group. Ours was called RISK, Richmonders Involved in Strengthening Our Community. And so some reps from this group from different congregations went to see other places where churches were doing a better job, just sparking more light and change in a public school. And so this is my group of interfaith deacons. There's literally a Baptist deacon, a Presbyterian deacon, a Holiness Church deacon, our rabbi, my rabbi, me, and we get in the car to go see another school in another neighborhood close to another set of churches. We went to Baltimore. We head up 95. I'm the driver because I'm the youngest. So all my deacons and my rabbi are crammed in the back, and we have fun going up, and we see a school that is surrounded by 3 enormous public housing complexes. There was literally a shooting the day we were there on the street, but the school was like Shangri-La. The school was beautiful. The children were singing. There was like a grandparents program, and dads were playing basketball, and moms cooked the lunches, and it was a place I want to be right now. 5-year-olds were like, we do it this way. And it was a wonderful, peaceful place. And we all were kind of like high on like, this is great. If we could do this in our Woodville Elementary School in East Richmond, man, get the community involvement and the grandparent volunteers. This is going to be perfect. We're going to change the city. So we're all excited. And I'm driving still on the way back down. And my car gets really quiet. All my ecumenical deacons in the back get very hushed. And I was like, do you not feel optimistic that we could take this program and do it, and my church will throw all the money in, and we're gonna fix this school. They're gonna love it. And there's one woman here who was a young organizer. She came up. She was a young SNCC organizer back in the 60s, and from a big Baptist church in town. And she said, well, I don't know if your people could really do this kind of change work. I was like, my people, we're in the Sprong Church. We're good. We go all in. We got all the money. We're devoted. She said, no. You represent this church. It's predominantly European American church, Southern church, and your people don't know how to really do change with community because they don't know how to build relationship. She said some of her exact cutting words were, you Episcopalians don't really want to be in relationship with us because you never share your burdens, and that's what relationship means. And then all the car joined in. They said, yes, you are the wealthy church, the endowed church, the powerful church, the center of attention. You get media concerns. It's not that you're not good, but what you do is you invite folks from our church to come, and you take the chair and you stick it in the hall and say, today's forum is on poverty in Richmond. And you tell one of us to sit there and tell our sad story. And you never tell us yours. That's what friendship is. That's what relationship is. And so as I think about how hard it was to get my congregation, look at Ed again, involved in our interfaith group, how when it was time for house meetings, the other churches had things to share and had ideas, and our house meetings were, we should help those people. Oh yes, we don't have any problems. I thought that's the missing piece for us. To train and teach Episcopalians that being authentic, that sharing their own story and burdens was a blessing, was the piece that we were missing between wanting to do good and actually being allies with justice. So that was a part of my conversion to, teaching, training, coaxing, dragging people, modeling the authenticity of where you're broken and not perfect was a necessary step. It was a blessing in that way of love. And so we're talking about this practice, how to do the Jesus movement. And Darby and I were talking like, storytelling is important because it makes things possible. But I'm going to share the mic with you, Darby, to talk about some other ways in which storytelling does all things. And we've lost our big mic, but I'll give you this one. Okay.
Shall I stay attached to you? It's kind of cozy. Isn't she wonderful? I first met her on a Zoom call, and I thought, can this person be this wonderful in real life? And she's even more wonderful. Storytelling. And did you all just have a huge paradigm shift there when you heard what she just said? We're not sharing. I mean, I heard people go, aha. Someone back there went, ah. Yeah. The piece that I wanted to share, where I come in on this, is not just the person telling their story, but I'm standing in front of a room of pretty much rock star listeners. That's the other half of it. The power of deep listening, as I was talking about last night. So when people come up to share their stories, it's also giving people, as you all described last night, when we were talking about why does listening work? You had beautiful reasons. It gives people a space, a safe space, just to be with me. I'm trying to think of someone in the back said something beautiful about its permission. It's permission. It's permission, as you were just saying, to be vulnerable in front of each other. And as you said, that's what relationship means. So my piece in this is that the listener and the storyteller share that power together. And it's most life-changing when they do it for each other. just as you were saying, it can't go in one direction. Put someone in a hallway, in a chair. I'm almost thinking of a bare light bulb over them when you're saying, interrogating them about their life and how much trust you have. You have to have in a situation like that. I would be so in awe of anyone who had the courage to talk at all in that situation, right? So the fact that it's a two-way street, it just makes so much sense to me. So we're going to be practicing some of that later, and listeners as well as storytellers.
So hopefully you brought back your handout. If you didn't, that's okay, because these are more, right?
Well, we're going to share. If you don't have one. Yeah.
So this idea of sharing a story as fundamental blessing, as telling and listening, we want to give us all a chance to sort of practice. And like Debbie said, you're rock star listeners, and probably you don't get through any sort of discernment process without telling your story again and again. But how can we work on just that little technique of eliciting and listening to the holy, of driving down to the practices of what the storytelling is? And so we're in a different configuration, but what we thought we could do was to practice by pairing up and doing some story sharing and listening in rounds with each other. So if you are near someone or there's someone you want to share with, we're going to let you gather in and start that way. Go for it.
Do we have a structure for time?
Oh, I'm gonna watch on. I do. Awesome. So we're going to do 5 and 5.
Yeah, 5 and 5 to start. Yeah.
This is my good partner here. Hello. So we're going to ask you to, you've got your partner, tell your story of call, your story of action, of motivation, something that indicates what motivates you and drives you. But the work is also for the listener. How do you ask the questions that get at the holy? And the second tip we want to do is, how do you get to the deeper why? So I don't know about you, but when I was working with my congregants and we go, why do you want to get involved in justice? Oh, because it's a good thing, right? That's the first why. Okay, but why is that important to you? Well, my grandma taught me to be a good person. Second why. Okay, so why do you want to do this now? Well, actually, I want children to grow up like I did and have a good life. Third why. So drive down to the next why as a technique as well. So we're going to let us practice each of these things in rounds. And you've got the sheet that talks about the wonderful questions about listening to the spark of the holy as well.
And about that spark, it says listen for the spark. Listeners, do that kind of deep listening. Do you remember when I said that yesterday? Abby was the person who listened so deeply to Kim and determined that she wasn't meant to be a teacher. She was meant to be an advocate for the hungry. The gift she gave, she was watching Kim's body language. She was listening with her whole body. So when you're listening to your partner, look for that spark in their eyes. The spark can, this is what you all do, but it doesn't hurt to hear it again, deacons. You're looking for that spark. I think that spark is the spark of God in that person, and you'll see it, you'll recognize it. When I coach people in listening, we talk about their eyes get crinkly, either because they get crinkly eyes, either because something's warming their hearts and they're going that, or because they're about to cry. And, tears are just God leaking out, right? It's just truth leaking out. So look for changes in their face, warm moments, and maybe later we can talk about if anybody saw the spark in somebody else.
Okay. That's great, yeah. So we're actually going to give you a good length of time. At about 5 minutes, we'll remind you that if your story has gotten so deep you haven't switched, to switch over. And we'll come back around and sort of practice again with the second set of skills. So
I have an idea.
Okay.
Let's do a little longer. Let's do maybe 10 and 10 because they're going deep. What do you think?
What questions are we asking?
Awesome. So how does that sound? Okay. So that is just a crib sheet if any of it inspires you. Okay. So the kind of question is, let's say, where is a moment that you've seen God in your work in the last 3 weeks, the last month? Okay. Just ask the person about that and look for that spark in them. And I've just asked, I know I'm barging in and changing things, but I'm thinking 5 minutes and 5 minutes. Does that sound like long enough to you? Yeah, you don't, okay, you don't want that 10-10 thing? Okay, we got a big shaking head. Yes. Yes, this first round. Okay, well then back to 5. I've gotten a clear message on that.
Sounds
All right.
good.
Yep.
All right. Listen for the spark and begin.
Where have you seen God in the last week? Thank you for just rolling with it.
Oh, no, thank you.
This is where I want to eavesdrop on everybody's
Yeah,
story.
I think we should
That's
do.
the hard part
We
about
should do
being
that.
up front.
Is the plan for them to share a little bit following this 5
Yes.
5?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I'll stand in the middle.
Oh,
of
so then you like,
I got a request from YouTube Land to
mic up
mic
comments?
up the, yeah.
I'm so glad.
That's
When
good.
I was in the back, I couldn't hear a lot of people, so that's
Oh, you couldn't. Okay.
yeah. So that's great.
Oh, so people are watching.
Yeah.
Maybe
Well-
we should read things from the sheet out loud then, or because I don't know. Never mind.
Just one.
Oh, that's cool.
You set it up though really well with the why and the. I think people get the idea.
Yeah. And then we'll let people share, and then we drill down. And,
Sound good?
yeah.
This is improv.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just to see what seems to be they want.
Well, yeah, you want practical tools, so
Yeah.
Oh, it fits completely.
to bridge the idea. Yeah. Get yourself out, and then you're going to get people out, right?
Oh yeah. Totally.
I love this. Our Northern Virginia Dart IF organizer said, "That's how you always know community organizers in the room, because the first thing they do is start one-on-oneing each other. Like even at a conference, it's like they're always practicing and see if they can do it better. And like, yeah, like
You mean it's sort of like a competitive thing?
or it's
better
like
for themselves.
yeah, for
That's what you
themselves.
meant.
I think it's like a
Okay.
yeah. You never. You can get rusty, and then you always want to. Yeah.
And you know, a lot of times deacons don't get a chance to tell their own story. So
Right.
that's one of the reasons I was so thrilled that you were willing to bring storytelling.
Oh
into
yeah.
it.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
How else, what else are sermons? You know, like.
Have you ever noticed when you're preaching and you're talking, you start to actually tell a story, and then everybody's like, oh,
Yep.
it's like,
Yep.
it's like chocolate, just gets it.
Right. Yeah. Or like we would do things in church that people were like, I don't know, I don't feel like we should do that. So then I would preach a sermon about it, and people were like, yeah, that's a great ministry. Oh my goodness.
Right.
Okay.
It's just sparking. Yeah, in Maine they call it
It's
acting and
sparking.
sparking. You're acting and sparking.
Yeah, totally. Okay.
It's all hay package.
It's inviting them into the larger space. There we go.
I love that. And that story you shared about that.
Yeah,
that was a paradigm shift. You know, where all of a sudden, whoa, and you saw the faces.
is your reminder. If you haven't switched to your partner's story, now is a good time to do so. To look for the spark and to hear the holy. All right, listeners and tellers. There's a lot of good holy buzz going on. So I just want to ask you, did anybody here feel deeply listened to? Who felt deeply listened to?
Yeah? Who here was paired up with a really great listener? Yeah. All right. It helps to be deacons. I know it's kind of cheating, but yeah, it's like asking baseball players to play a baseball game. But you can always learn with a new person, right? And I hope that you learned something new about the person you were talking to. Are any partners people that hadn't met each other before at all? Yeah, you paired up with new people over there. Yeah, yeah. So I just want to kind of kick this off. Aaron's going to be able to travel with a microphone. I wanted to ask, first of all, to talk to the listeners. And if you saw the spark of God in someone as they were telling you where they'd seen God in the last month or so, will you share that with us? I'm going to ask the listeners to give us an insight into what your tellers were telling you. Is anyone willing to? Yeah.
I saw this.
Confidentiality. Yes, thank you.
Ask the person if you can share their part of their story.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you. Always with the permission of the person you spoke to and with confidentiality in mind. Thank you. That's absolutely important. Thank you. Stephanie, thank you. You're saving my cakes, so thank you.
Abby has given me permission to say part of her story, which was very powerful and centered largely on her relationship with her son, who has some mental health issues. But what came through to me in terms of the spark of God, Abby, was that deep, deep, deep connection you have with him and the way that the two of you navigate through life and through tremendous challenges and are still praying and working for the place that you get to, not so much in your relationship, but for him in his life and you in your life. And it seems like God is really there in that relationship, in its turmoil and in its, not turmoil for him, and in its potential and power. And you got the crinkly eyes.
She got the crinkly eyes. Did anybody else see a spark and have permission to share?
I had a conversation with Jane, and she works in a hospital, and she was urged not to go into a room to visit someone. And she saw someone sitting in the room and with the patient. And there was not a lot of interaction, but the person was patiently sitting there. And it was someone that she wouldn't expect would demonstrate patience. Probably someone that you expected maybe didn't demonstrate love as what you would think. And she went into the room, and she ended up, because the patient was nonverbal, she had a conversation with the person sitting there. And that person didn't look like her, was not the same gender, and probably a different age. And she ended up having a relationship with that person in that he had a story to tell. And in that story, it would the love for his mother came out. But it wasn't, I think, something that you expected to have the relationship with this young man, but instead with the patient. And it was the young man who had to tell his story.
Jane, how beautiful that you shared, Jane, right? Do I have that right? Up from Rockland? Yeah. That what you shared was actually what we're talking about, which is the power of deep listening. Yeah. Thank you. And thank you for being such a good listener and sharing that with us. Anybody else see a spark, person that they were speaking with?
Is it okay for the listener to have a spark that goes off for the person? But, just listening.
Absolutely. We're all about sparks here. They can go in any direction. We just want to get as much kindling out there as possible.
Well, it just kind of went off when
Yeah.
Liz was talking about liturgy and how much she loves it, but she didn't there's no time.
Hmm.
You know, it was just kind of, oh, I really want to do that. And I love that. And I know her a little bit more because of being in formation with her. And I know that she just, you saw it too. She just oozes liturgy. So
Oh my
I
gosh.
thought about when the bishops were talking last night about the changing the Book of Common Prayer. And I thought, oh, so we just kind of shared about, you really should look into that and being a part of that whole process. But the spark I just went, oh.
It sounds like
That
the
was the
spark was
spark
big
of
enough
God.
that, I'm sorry, I can't remember your name, who's sitting next to her here.
Kathy Harper.
But Kathy, this spark was so big that Liz was like, I saw it too. Yeah. So did you notice what happened when you just named one of her gifts about the liturgy and her love for it? Did you see her body language, what she did? She went, that's exactly what, is it Nick Nicely who was here last night? When you were giving him so much love up there on the podium, he did the same thing. He went, just a little, I saw it. Having your gifts named out loud is one of the most empowering things you can do. Sometimes it feels a little uncomfortable, right? We're not used to having them named out loud. But, there are a lot of gifts in this room, and I'm so excited to be hearing about them because everyone in this room now knows about your passion for the liturgy. So maybe I'm not so great at the liturgy, So I've got someone I know who loves it. Now we know about her gift thanks to you for listening so carefully. Yeah. And you look like you're a pretty engaged listener too, because you got all sparked up. So that's another gift as well. Anybody else hear something that either sparked in them or you saw spark in someone's eyes when you were talking, April?
It's interesting because I've known Jessie. We've gone through formation together, and I was talking about a piece of my call, and she looked at me and said, I never get tired of listening from where you came from to where you are now. I enjoy your story over and over again.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
So what you're saying is a story can just keep feeding people.
We have something in common. She's in the Church of the Good Shepherd, and I'm in the really, really good Church of the Good Shepherd.
The really, really good.
The great stuff.
Good.
But the spark I heard was she had her collar on and she was leaving church, and this person came up and asked her for money, and she said, I know I'm not supposed to give money to people, but she did. But and the woman said, oh, I'll pay you back. And what she did was she said, no, pay it forward. And I could see a spark in your eye when you said that. It was really something.
I heard her tell her story.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Would you hand her the microphone? I want to hear what you said.
I said my desire was for her to tell her story about what happened between us and to pay it forward. And yeah, it was a beautiful moment.
Because it was likely that she would take what happened when she paid it forward and say, well, this lady who helped me, that's why I'm doing it. So your story just keeps going and adds her story to it.
Are there any more? Got like 4 minutes. Yeah. Any others that want to? Got a couple more minutes. Well, did it feel like blessing to you? Like, did it feel you felt that holy spark? I was blessed listening to your accounts of that work. That it's not just a critical piece of being very pastoral, but of doing the whole work of God for us. And if you don't believe me, this very subtle and easy technique is a part of everything we do through the Episcopal Church, through the Jesus movement. And it's hearing the story, hearing the Holy Spark is the cornerstone now of our reconciliation work, of our evangelism work. If you do community organizing and you map the neighborhood to figure out what the next mission is, you map it and go house to house. and hear stories. I know some parishes that have roving listeners. They train teenagers to listen deeply and ask a question that gets to the next why. And they do it because how else would you know what your neighbors love, need, want? But listening and extending that blessing even beyond our membership and our personal connections. And I love this evangelism card. There's a whole evangelism toolkit, by the way, because someone asked me about that. And it's no coincidence that these are the same skills, the same Jesus movement, way of love skills that you use in your pastoral life, in your justice work life, but also in your evangelism. It's the work of being Jesus for somebody. And it even tells us the prompts on the back to start to share your story and how you invite others that might not be from our faith background or our neighborhood. But as a key place to bridge the ideals of what Jesus movement is and how we go about doing it, living it, being a part of blessing, breaking before we go and after we rest with each other. Any other thoughts about that? I have one more thought. Yeah.
I'm just going back to that paradigm shift moment for me when Melanie told the story of being the driver in the car and having them say, "You never share your burdens with us," and that's what a relationship is. And when she told me that story, I think this morning, and my paradigm really shifted. It hurts when your paradigm shifts. It's sort of physically uncomfortable. But think of the difference if you all had just shared, not as partners, but one of you told your story, and then that was it. Something really different happened in that moment when you guys knew you were going to be sharing with each other. So I just wanted to say that.
Jan has a question.
So I'm feeling very not empowered, but validated, because I've always understood stories to be the way that we do relationship. Probably because I'm a card-carrying member of AA, but nevertheless, I just know storytelling is critical. And we have a chaplains group on campus. So I'm chaplain to University of Rhode Island, and we have a chaplains group, and it's interfaith, right? And so the election happens, and there's this big divide in the country, and there's a big divide in the churches, and there's a big divide on campus. And and it's like, how do we get these students to cross over that divide? And I was sitting in the chaplains group looking around saying, we've never done our work. And why don't we start telling our stories? Because I'm lesbian, I'm married to a woman, and there are people sitting in that room who would not support this lifestyle, right? But my story is my story, and their story is their story. And so we have started trying to spend time, 1 hour a month, telling our stories so that others can listen. Because I said, how can we go out and work with students to cross a divide if we don't know how to cross our own divide?
How is that going?
We've only done it once so far, but the second one is coming up, and it's scary. No, but yeah, exactly. But each of us has to be vulnerable, and that's what's happening. So, I mean, this is validation, but I think it can work in all kinds of settings where we can be role models then to do it with others, right? But if we find ourselves in a group that has a divide in it, this is the way. And there were 3 of us that came together and said, we have to tell our stories. A Baptist, an Episcopalian, and the head of Hillel, our Jewish friend. And we said, we need to hear their stories.
Oh gosh, I love that.
This is what you're saying is making me think of a moment last night. I can't remember if it was Steve who said it or maybe you said it about ground rules, that when you get a group of people together who are going to be vulnerable like that, that's a very difficult thing to set up. And if we're going to be not in agreement, but reconciled, difference between the two, as you were saying, how can we encourage these public spaces where the rules are, it's not Facebook. You're not trying to convince someone you're right. You don't have to agree with them. You're just agreeing to come together and accept the truths that you're hearing How can we help that happen? So figuring out, and Steve, was that you talking about ground rules? Yeah. Do you have any more thoughts about how to make that happen in a group when people are going off to groups to try this very vulnerable work?
I think two things about that. One is intentionality. We have to be clear what we're doing. And if we're going to be sharing our stories, we need to be clear that's what it is. Not debate. It's not argument. We're going to share with each other what our stories are. And then I think the other thing is that we're not required to agree, but we are required to be respectful. So I'm going to listen to your story even if it makes me crazy. And I'm going to accept it. And I don't have, and I think this is where leadership is critical, that I mind the norms as a leader, that we're listening to each other's stories. We're not correcting one another. We're not trying to convince one another that my lifestyle is best. We're just listening and responding. So I think writing it up on the wall is critical. And do we all get this? Are we doing? These are the rules for our time together. This is what we get agreement, and then the leader really, I think, has that obligation to mind the norms.
May I ask one more question? Yeah. I'm learning so much. Thank you. Just another question about that. What's a gentle way? Because I'm sure you're doing this all the time, right? And I know Michael is, my husband who works with Steve. You're a leader in the room, and someone's not observing the norm. What's the gentlest, most loving way of holding that boundary for people? How do you do it?
That's so context sensitive.
Yeah.
If you're at the diocesan convention and someone's yelling from the back of the room, which has happened, you say, "I'm sorry, sir, that's out of order." That would not work in a group like this. So I think, I think it would depend very much on the group and what's happening, but simply to say, so let's remember what our agreement is. Is this in line with our agreement? And let that person call themselves out, if you will, but to affirm the norm.
I think sometimes too, they have like a parking lot, so you can put other ideas. So the idea is still.
This is a great idea. I want to make sure you're heard because this is a great idea. Parking lot. Will you tell people about that? In case they don't know that idea?
I've been at meetings where they have a paper up and you just put ideas that don't fit into exactly what you're talking about onto the parking lot. So the person's idea is still respected, but it can be dealt with later or talked offline later.
Yeah. So there's a place to put that.
Yeah.
I just wanted to tag onto the parking lot thing, and that is keeping it in front of everybody else. So you're not dismissing the person by saying, that's not a topic we're going to cover right now.
Right.
But here's your idea up here in front of all of us. We know that this needs to be talked about at some point, just not right now.
Tell me if this is parking lot and I'll save it. This kind of comes from last night and today. There's been a general assumption that coffee hour is frivolous. And something happened to me that was a paradigm shift. We're going in, our dean of the cathedral is having her last Sunday tomorrow. So we're headed into an interim period. And as a result, we're worshiping as one group and we're going to stay one service. We're usually 3 services, at least until Advent. What's happened is that everyone is together for coffee hour and we're not rushing off to do something else. So it's not the sort of the old traditional 11 o'clock coffee hour. It's everybody together. And in one coffee hour, it's been for me as a deacon really different. I feel like it's an ongoing story. So I had somebody that last week who had just been discharged from the psychiatric floor who wanted to talk. I had a dad of a South Sudanese family who's having a home built by basically Habitat for Humanity, and I keep a picture of Rosa Parks that he bought at an auction for $10 in my office until his house is ready, so he needed to tell me about his house. I had a woman an elderly woman with a broken hip who'd just come out of the hospital who wanted to tell me about that.
I had somebody who's very involved in the migrant workers movement who had just brought someone back from a detainment center in Boston who was so worried about the trauma she might have experienced there. And then somebody else who's an elder who comes to coffee hour because it's a meal for him every day or every Sunday. And I was thinking, those are ongoing stories. And so I want to sort of, I heard everybody go, no, coffee hour is not frivolous, but I want to put a plug in for coffee hour as the place where a deacon is going to hear the ongoing stories. It means being intentional enough to not just sort of get your cup of tea and leave, but to really, and Catherine Cook, our archdeacon in Vermont, really trained me, I think, about this. She would come up to me and say, Stan, you know, there's somebody who needs your ear. But to be there as a listener for all of those stories and keep collecting them and then seeing it as an ongoing through line of the needs and challenges of the parish.
I had something I want to say about that. Okay. Amen. Right. And the reason I'm quivering up here as you're saying that is because last night when I spoke about find one person, ask them their story, what's going on with them, look for the spark in them. What you're talking about is the thing that empowers us laity the most. We get a chance to tell our stories. You know, usually we're in the pews watching you guys, as my little son used to say, on stage. I'm like, it's not a stage, but it is in some ways. But think of all those stories that you're hearing that are happening out in your congregation, all those lay people with those interesting lives and the gifts that they have. And what a beautiful ministry to give them a chance to talk about them. Because what you're doing when you do that is, first of all, you're loving them, but you're also helping them identify their own gifts. And that is like kindling. Oh my God. I want to come to that coffee hour. Chapter by chapter. Yeah. All right.
I just want to make a quick comment that since we introduced or talked about the concept of the parking lot, when we are thinking of creation care in the community where I'm at, we refer to it as the bike rack.
The bike rack. I'm going to borrow that one.
You win. That's great.
Put it on the bike
I
rack.
love that bike rack idea. I actually have over the years developed a sort of a theology about the coffee hour. What happens in church is the vertical, and what happens in coffee hour is the horizontal, and the two of them make the cross. For me, community happens in coffee hour, and I think it's really important. When my son was 14 years old, I was apparently spending too long at coffee hour, and he just picked me up and carried me away. But I love the coffee hour.
The cross. Oh, wonderful.
It's the stories that extends the meal.
Extends the meal. Extends the meal, the holy meal.
Yeah, my name is Beatrice. Originally, I'm from Uganda, and I serve here. About 3 weeks ago, we just had a very wonderful story. Of course, every story is wonderful because it's very important for someone who was giving it, and it's so important in my life since I had that story. I'm not going to reveal who it was because he's not here to give him permission. But this story made me to love him so much because I got to know, I had an opportunity of knowing whom I'm dealing with. Who is he? Because his story was from where he was born, how did he grow up, how his life, how the world messed him up, where is he now, and where does he want to be in the future. So, and that is my life. So as he was talking, as he was giving me his story, it felt like it was me giving him my story. Some patterns were different, but that made me to like him, to love him so much and respect him so much because he revealed who he is. These stories, they give us power to tell our fellow people whom we work with in the ministry to know us. It's very hard to be in Jesus's movement. You are moving, going forward. You go, you get into the boats. You go on the other side of the town. and people don't know you. You know, Jesus's movement is to know one another and to respect one another. Our stories is to know who you are. And my story, do you know my story? And if there is anybody who would need help, we know who can go ahead and help that person, because you have passed it through. People, you know my story. In Western Massachusetts, my fellow deacons know my story because we talk about it all the time. They know where I come from. They know my school in Africa, in Uganda. They know Deacon Jane has been to the school and to the church where I was baptized and where I was confirmed. Of course, things have changed. That was in the early 60s. Things have changed. But at least when we went to Uganda, she saw my church and I said, Jane, this is the church I always talked about. I was baptized here. I was confirmed here. And my alphabets are from this school. They know me. So we give these stories for people to know us.
Yes.
To know who we are. And the stories are different. They're not the same. And there can't be copyright. Because every person, their story is different. You can't copy, it can't be your story. So let's keep on giving stories. I love this. Thank
you. Amen. So let's keep on giving stories. I am so honored to be at the receiving end of your stories and the story we're telling together. I was just thinking, it was a deacon who was nosy enough to walk up into Virginia Seminary my middle year and say, who wants to learn storytelling, and pay for some seminarians to go to a IAF training and learn how to tell stories. And it was a deacon we heard who told the stories of people suffering in Alabama that sort of sparked this wave of movement. And I think it's going to be deacons like you who teach people to listen to stories, so this church will be seen as relevant and the vanguard of justice and the people who show people Jesus. And so I am honored and thankful that you are here living this story, that you are a part of the continuation of Jesus' story, and that we can share the story together.
Can we come back next Saturday and do this again? Oh, I got a really bad look there.
Well, doing it in spirit, but thank you. And we are going to move on to the lunch story now. So where shall we go and what shall we do?
We shall go back to the Worcester Room, which is on the second floor where we had breakfast. But first, I have a small apology. From the perspective of the conference planning committee, well, Derby and Melanie have never met each other. This is the first time that they've met each other. They've certainly worked together in the conference plan, but there were a couple of times during the conference planning process, it felt a little bit like the airplane, we were flying the airplane and we were still building it. It's worked out marvelously. So I apologize for any doubt that we had at all. Bishop Steve has offered to pray us into lunch.